Not all stories are filled with easy-to-identify, built-in conflict. Today I want to talk about one of those. Scythe by Neal Shusterman, How to Read Like a Writer. Shusterman set himself quite the challenge with the utopic society of Scythe. From his novel, writers can learn to find conflict in any situation, how to constantly make things worse, and how to use journals to both advance your plot and deepen your characters. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with making Utopia interesting. Dystopias are riddled with problems. They're based on futures where everything has gone wrong, so they have built-in conflict. There's conflict present in every aspect of that world. Utopias are the opposite of this. In a utopic society, everything's gone right, and the only conflict left seems to be petty. A story without conflict is boring, so I've often wondered how an author could pull off a utopic society story and keep me interested. Neal Shusterman showed me how. The premise of Scythe is humans have defeated disease, death, and pain. They live in a utopic world. However, the Earth can only support so much population. So they have created a system of people responsible for killing others to keep that population in check. This is the Scythedom, and their workers or Grim Reapers are called Scythes. In this world, you're chosen to be a Scythe as a teenager. So Shusterman's story follows the lives of two teenagers once they're chosen. Even though the world of Scythe itself is a utopia, people are still people. There are still people who want power, who are greedy, and who are kind of evil. So these people have managed to infiltrate the Scythedom. That's where the conflict comes from in this story. Yes, they can defeat disease. Yes, they can overcome pain, heal any injury, prevent death. But people are still people. Your world, characters, or relationships and setting can be mostly good. They can be in a good place and still have a little bit of conflict to make that story interesting. Remember, conflict doesn't always have to be some big, grand thing. It can be two people competing for the same award. It can be the end of a relationship or someone not believing someone else. Look for conflict even in places where it seems like everything is perfect. Next, I want to talk about what could be worse. One way to build conflict into your story is to ask yourself what could be worse. Shusterman does this well in Scythe. Throughout the course of the novel, his characters are constantly presented with larger and larger obstacles. The inciting incident is two teenagers witnessing death in a society where death has practically been eradicated. That's traumatizing, and just the inciting incident. Soon after, they're chosen to become death dealers themselves, and this forces them to leave their families and the society that they know. Throughout the story, they will become separated from the people they rely on and each other. They will face atrocities they didn't know still existed in their world, feel the lonely isolation of being social outcasts, and even experience torture and death. Citra and Rowan are not the same characters by the end of the story. How could they be? When you ask yourself what could be worse, you are naturally going to have a character arc. Characters and people cannot go through traumatic events like this without coming out the other side changed in some way. When you make your story worse, your character and plot arcs become more natural feeling. So, think of the story that you're writing or want to write, and list 5 ways it could be worse. These should be things that could happen in the story you're writing. If you're writing an epic fantasy, sure, someone could die. But maybe what could be worse in your story is your mom doesn't believe your main character. Or someone breaks up. Or your character fails a test of some sort. Or doesn't get that promotion. List 5 ways things could be worse for your characters over the course of your story. Then, try writing some of those scenes. See what it does. Next, I want to talk about journals that add insight into characters and plot. Many authors use journals as a tool to show their characters' inner thoughts and emotions, especially if they're not using first person. However, this is not always a good enough reason to use a journal. Some characters just would not journal. It's not something they would do. When you force them to, your reader doesn't believe your story. It adds a believability issue. Shusterman gets around this because his society requires Scythe to keep a daily journal. This is to document the deaths that they dole out and in a way to keep them in check. These journals become public record. This explains why they're present throughout the book and why Citra and Rowan are able to access them. Shusterman uses these journals to add other character perspectives as well as Citra and Rowan's, to world build and to advance the plot. In every journal entry, new information is revealed. Here's an example. In my early years, I wondered why it was so rare to catch a Scythe out of his or her robes and in common street clothes. It's a rule in some places, but not mid-America. Then, as I settled in, it occurred to me why it must be. For our own peace of mind, we Scythes must retain a certain level of separation from the rest of humanity. In this paragraph, Shusterman is revealing some nuances of his world. He's letting you know why the Scythes don't dress in normal clothes even though they can. They purposely keep themselves separated to make them feel better and also to make society feel better. They are apart from everyone else. This moment also shows the character coming to this realization on her own and accepting it. She's not just following the custom, she understands the custom and is following it because she agrees with it. When you use journal entries like this to world build, it can quickly become an information dump. Shusterman attempts to keep this in check by making sure no journal entry is more than a page or two. He keeps them short and to the point, and each journal entry is directly impacting whatever that chapter happens to be about. Format is key to a journal's success as a story tool. It needs to be clear when each journal entry begins and ends. In Scythe, the journal entries always happen at the beginning of the chapter. They're never more than a page or two long. They're bracketed by extra spaces, and the font is just different enough from the regular font that a reader notices and can tell where they begin and end. Shusterman does all of these things to make it clear that this is a journal entry and not Rowan or Citra's perspective. If you're going to use journals or any other form of written documentation in your story, make sure it fits these requirements. Make sure it's clear when they begin and end. Also, make sure your character would actually keep that journal. If they wouldn't, it reads false to a reader and it takes them out of your story. You don't want that. When journal entries become boring and the types of information that readers just skip over are when they go on forever, readers will start to skim. They only have so much patience for journals and other forms of written documents because they feel almost like a footnote to the story. And when they don't reveal new information. Even if your journal entry is telling the reader how your character feels, if your reader has already witnessed your character feeling that, that's not new information. Make sure each entry is revealing something new, either about your characters or your plot or your world. I want to leave you with why an editor recommends Scythe by Neal Shusterman. If you are searching for a new take on science fiction and fantasy, read Scythe. In Shusterman's novel, teenagers are chosen to become grim reapers of their society. And it's a good thing. Families want their teenagers to be chosen. That's interesting. In addition to these other qualities I've covered, pay attention to the ending of Scythe. This is a series, but at the end, the reader feels satisfied. The main conflicts of this book have been tied up, those stakes have been won and lost. But Shusterman hints at what is going to happen in book 2. He keeps the reader interested without falling back on a cliffhanger. Ending books in a series is hard. You have to give the reader enough of a resolution that they feel satisfied, but not too much that they feel like the story is over, and not too little that they feel like they've been left with a cliffhanger and they hate you for it. There's a balance to be struck, and Shusterman finds that balance. It's a great example to use for your own series. Also, of course, pay attention to how he adds conflict to a utopic society. Shusterman found conflict in a place where there shouldn't be conflict. Pay attention to how he constantly makes things worse for his characters, and how he utilizes journal entries. That way you can use these same techniques in your writing. What other writing techniques did you notice in Scythe? Share them in the comments below. And for more videos on how to read like a writer and incorporate these techniques into your own stories, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a chart comparing the different points of view. And now it's your turn to use conflict, make things worse, and utilize journals to ignite your ink.